All right, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I like to give all honor, praise, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushua, Bahashem, Ruach HaKodesh. Double honor to the elders and apostles, a great millstone who rule well. Peace and salutations to the elect scattered abroad. This is Brother Barazal here with a lesson, and Lord willing is edifying. All right, and this lesson will be entitled, The Lord is Coming Back to Smite the Nations. All right, because we're currently in a time of war, right? You know, the third woe, all right, where all the nations are being gathered up in the so-called Middle East, right? You got the least of the flock drawing them out, going into the small hat, right? Also known as the Amalekites that come from the nation of Edom, all right? Because, you know, we understand that those are not the true biblical Israelites. You know, those are Edomite imposters, right? Making it seem like they're the Israelites of the Bible, which they're not. They don't fit, right, the description, right? They don't fit the prophecies, all right? But however, they do fit the prophecies of being the Edomites, being the wicked, all right? They fit the Job 9:24 prophecy, all right? But going back into it, all right, we're going to read Isaiah 34:1, because the end result of this war is going to be Yahweh Shai coming back, right, and smiting these different nations, establishing the kingdom of heaven, right, putting these, those who survived the war, that's of the heathen nations, into captivity, right? So this is the book of Isaiah 34:1. It says, "Come near, ye nations, to hear, and hearken, ye people. Let the earth hear, and all that is therein, the world, and all things that come forth of it. For the indignation of the Lord is upon all nations, and his fury upon all their armies. He hath utterly destroyed them. He hath delivered them to the slaughter." All right, now this is going into when the Lord returns. All right, the different nations are going to gather themselves together and try to, fight against the Lord. Right, you see these different things like Esau. He got the Space Force, right? Different things like that to defend against Yahweh Shai, but that's not going to work. All right, and we understand that also, that this is the Lord, right? Pretty much gathering up these nations and putting them in that warlike spirit, right? Because you're going to see these different nations coming together, starting with Russia, right? China, and these other nations. They're going to come against Babylon and destroy it. And that's ultimately the Lord mustering the hosts of the battle, right? Actually, let's get that real quick. It's the book of Isaiah 13, and we'll just go straight to the point. The noise, Isaiah 13:4, the noise of a multitude in the mountains, like as of a great people, a tumultuous noise of the kingdoms of the nations gathered together. The Lord of hosts mustereth the host of the battle. So this is ultimately the Lord causing these nations to clash, right? And we know that it's all going to start well, right? In the valley of Jehoshaphat, right? Going into the so-called Middle East, right? Which in translation means Yahweh Mashapat, or the Most High's judgment. All right. So that's where, the war is going to start, right? In the so-called Middle East, which is really Western Asia. Verse 5, it says, "They come from a far country, from the end of heaven, even the Lord, and the weapons of his indignation to destroy the whole land." So these are the Lord's weapons, right? The Lord put the spirit on different, Edomites, right, to come up with this thermonuclear technology, right? The atomic bomb and such, right? Pretty much to their own demise, okay? Verse 6, "How ye, for the day of the Lord is at hand, it shall come as a destruction from the Almighty." So that's the day of the Lord. It's going to be destruction, bloodshed, right? And we're going to read about it, going back to Isaiah, the 34th chapter. And it says, verse 3, their slain shall be cast out, and their stink shall come up out of their carcasses, and the blood shall be and the mountain shall be melted with their blood. So this is representative of how much death and destruction is going to be as a result of this third woe. And all the hosts of heaven shall be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled together as a scroll. This is going to that thermonuclear destruction, right? It also goes into that in the Revelation, the 6th chapter. The heavens shall be rolled together as a scroll, going into that mushroom cloud, right? And that's going to be the fate of Babylon being destroyed, all right, in that thermonuclear destruction, right? The mushroom cloud, which, the two main places are going to be Babylon and the land of Israel that's going to, be destroyed, all right? It says, and all their hosts shall fall down, as the leaf falleth off from the vine, and as a falling fig from the fig tree. All right. So, whatever type of, defense Esau tries to, create to come against the Lord, right? Different fighter jets, right? Whatever the case may be, the Lord is going to bring them down. All right. It says, for my sword shall be bathed in heaven. Behold, it shall come down upon Idumea and upon the people of my curse to judgment. So Idumea is going into the Edomites. That's the Greek way of saying Edom, and the people of my curse, which if you get that word for curse, I believe it goes into appointed, right? So the people that he's appointed to judgment, that's going into Esau Edom, right? Because Esau Edom is currently in rulership, right? This is his kingdom, right? This is a Edomite power structure that we living in, all right? This is Esau's kingdom, right? So because when you read again Job 9:24, the world has been given into the hand of the wicked, which who is ruling? Esau Edom, the so-called white man. You see? So verse 6, the sword of the Lord is filled with blood. It is made fat with fatness, and with the blood of lambs and goats, with the fat of the kidneys of the ram, with the fat of the kidneys of rams. So this is going into, not a literal sacrifice, but the goats, the rams, the lambs, all right, the blood of lambs and goats. This is going into people that's going to be destroyed as a result of, this destruction. All right. Which the Lord is, which, pretty much this is the destruction of that day is being compared into a sacrifice, right? The people being like the, the animal, the lamb being sacrificed, right? The lamb being the altar, and the fire being that thermonuclear destruction. It says, for the Lord hath a sacrifice in Bozrah, which Bozrah is the chief place in Edom. So this is still talking about Esau, all right? Or you could say Babylon, right? And a great slaughter in the land of Idumea, which, of course, is going into Babylon again, all right? Because that's the pretty much the headquarters, right, of this kingdom, being, Babylon the Great, or America, all right? Verse 7, it says, and the unicorn shall come down with them, and the bullocks with the bulls, and their land shall be soaked with blood, and their dust made fat with fatness. For it is the day of the Lord's vengeance, and the year of recompenses for the controversy of Zion. So it's going to be the Lord's vengeance. And that's why we have to wait upon the Lord, and not take things upon our own hands, because this is ultimately, the Lord's prophecy. Well, our only job, right, is to blow that trumpet, right? Prophesy, right? Be in the faith, all right? Make our calling and election sure, and wait upon the Lord, because the Lord is coming with that vengeance, and the year of recompenses for the controversy of Zion. So this man has to pay, right, for what he's done to our people, putting us in slavery, all right, taking us away from our heritage. You know, the amount of wickedness that this man has done has been stacked up into the heavens, right? You can read that in the book of Revelation. But that's why this man has to get judged, all right? So this is the book of Revelation 19 and 11. It says, and I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse. Now this is going into the chariots, right? White meaning the purity, and the horse meaning the power that the Lord is coming with those chariots. And he that sat upon him was called Faithful and True. This is going into Yahushua, and in righteousness he doth judge and make war. And that's what Yahushua is coming back to do. Verse 12, his eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns, right? The many crowns representing, the many different nations that the Lord is going to take down, right? And he had a name written that no man knew but he himself, going into the Lord's position. No man is going to have that position or authority that Yahushua is going to have. All right. And he was clothed with a vesture dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God, right? Going into, it's another title, all right, that Yahushua has, being the Word. And the armies which were in heaven followed him upon white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, going into the angels, all right? Because the angels are coming as well with those chariots. And out of his mouth goeth a sharp sword, that with it he shall smite the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron, and he treadeth the winepress of the fierceness and the wrath of the Almighty power. So there you go. And that's what he's coming back to do. Smite the nations. Every nation that that takes part in this war, this world war, right? Which is, of course, mainly these heathens. They're going to be smitten with the sword, right? And that everybody that is involved in this war is going to be taken down, right? So we know that the small hats ain't the people. Because the true elect of Yahweh Bashim Yahushua is going to wait upon the Lord, not take matters into their own hands, not work with Babylon, right? Being in cahoots with Babylon and with this war and things of that nature and all right? The true people of the Lord, right? The Israelites, they're going to be in captivity and slavery. They're not going to have the amount of power that the small hats have, all right? And let me go down to 19. And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse and against his army. So that's what's going to happen, you see? So the beast, this beast system, the kings of the earth, right, the nations, right, and their armies, right, gathered together to make war against him that sat up on the horse and against his army. So they're going to be against Yahushua, you see? Now let me get, or they're going to come against Yahushua. The book of 2nd Esdras 13:1, because this also goes into it. And it came to pass after 7 days, I dreamed a dream by night, and lo, there arose a wind from the sea, that it moved all the waves thereof. And I beheld, and lo, that man waxed strong with the thousands of heaven. This is going into Yahushua and the angels. And when he turned his countenance to look, all the things that trembled that were seen under him. And whensoever the voice went out of his mouth, all they burned that heard his voice, like as the earth faileth when it feeleth the fire. And after this I beheld, and lo, there was gathered together a multitude of men. This is going into, those that's fighting in this war, right? The heathen nations, Russia, China, right? Because, there's not going to be they're not going to be the winners of this war, right? It's not going to be Babylon is taken down and then the Russians come into power for a certain period of time, or a different nation come into power for a certain period of time. Now, all right, Yahweh Shai is going to come and establish the kingdom, take these nations down, as we're about to read. All right, and this verse 5 it say, and after this I beheld, and lo, there was gathered together a multitude of men out of number from the four winds of the heaven to subdue the man that came out of the sea. You see, and but I beheld, and lo, he had graved himself a great mountain and flew upon it. This is going into the chariots, right? A great mountain, and Ezra, he's comparing it to a great mountain because of the size of the chariot. All right. Verse 7, but I would have seen the region or place where the hill was graven, and I could not. So, he can't even see the full size of the chariot. That's how big it is. At verse 8, and after this I beheld, and lo, all they which were gathered together to subdue him were so afraid, and yet there's fight. Yeah, so the Lord is going to put the spirit on these nations to still fight anyway. Even though they see in the power that the Lord is coming with, they pretty much know that they have that they no match for the Lord. They gonna still fight. You see? But what's gonna happen? Verse 9, and lo, as he saw the violence of the multitude that came, he neither lifted up his hand, nor held sword, nor any instrument of war, but only I saw that he sent out of his mouth as it had been a blast of fire, and out of his lips a flaming breath, and out of his tongue he hath cast out sparks and tempests. So, these different chariots is going to shoot out like pretty much like laser beams, right? And a strong concentrated fire, right, against these different, nations, armies that come against the Lord, right? And they're going to be pretty much obliterated. Verse 11, and they were all mixed together, the blast of fire, the flaming breath, and the great tempest, and fell with violence upon the multitude which was prepared to fight, and burned them up every one, so that upon a sudden of an innumerable multitude, nothing was to be perceived, but only dust and smell of smoke. When I saw this, I was afraid. So there you go. All right, they're going to be completely incinerated, turned into dust. Like how you see these different, cartoons and, things of that nature, right? Anime, whatever, you see a laser hitting, it's just a dust, right? A pile of dust. That's going to be what happens to these different nations, right? These different armies that come against the Lord. All right. Like you see Dragon Ball Z or something like that, like a Kamehameha or an energy blast that completely evaporates, disintegrates, whatever its target was. That's exactly what's going to happen to these different armies. That's the amount of power that Yahweh Shai is coming with. All right. And then, once that happens, once, the smoke settles, all right, that's when the kingdom is going to be established on the planet Earth. All right. But, that'll do it with the lesson. And Lord willing, it was edifying. So with that, I want to give all the honor and praise and glory unto Yahweh by Hashem, Yahweh Shai by Hashem, Ra HaKodash. Shalom.